Thank you. I'm going to move this a little bit, I think. This is really a great opportunity, and we have a great time when we get a chance to collaborate with other organizations in Des Moines, and the Playhouse is very excited to be part of the library series, so it's fun to do. I'm always reminded when anybody talks about cell phones, there's no one in the world that's more embarrassed about having their cell phone go off than a theater person. Because we tell theater audiences that on a regular basis, and so I did have to check one more time. Within the last couple of weeks, I had an opportunity at a convention to listen, to actually be in the same room and listen to Jane Goodall. And the thing that came across to me was I was in the presence of greatness. As I've learned more and more about your speaker tonight, George Guidall, I have discovered that you're going to be in the presence of greatness tonight. I actually have an interesting sort of personal connection to him. My daughter-in-law happens to do recorded books, and when I told her what I was going to do tonight, she said, "Really? You're going to introduce him?" He's just wonderful, and I can tell you, none of this is in the introduction, but one of the things that she did say, and she's newer in the business than George, but she said, he's a great mentor, he's a friend, there are always opportunities, and you look forward to the opportunity when you're actually recording at the same time and can pass in the hall. But because I don't want to miss anything about George, I'm going to do a little reading to you here, and I'm very nervous about it because he's sitting over there listening and saying, "Oh." Widely recognized as the world's most acclaimed and most prolific narrator of audiobooks, George Guidall has recorded close to 900 unabridged novels. He's probably recorded more than many people have read, bringing a consistent artistry to his readings and delighting listeners for over 20 years. His narrations of classics like Crime and Punishment, Frankenstein, the Iliad, along with bestsellers like Snow Falling on Cedars, Tony Hillerman's Southwestern Mysteries, Lillian Jackson Braun's Cat Who series, the novels of Philip Roth, and most recently, Night by Elie Wiesel, have set a standard for excellence recognized throughout the audiobook industry. His recordings have garnered uniformly excellent reviews from AudioFile, Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, the New York Times, and a variety of other national newspapers and magazines. He twice has received the coveted Audie Award. That's the industry equivalent of an Oscar, if you don't happen to know. This is really a big deal. For Best Unabridged Narration of a Novel, for his recording of John Irving's A Widow for 1 Year, and for his rendition of Wally Lamb's I Know This Much Is True. Other narrations he's been nominated for include David Robbins' War of the Rats, Ken Follett's Code to Zero, and his unabridged narration of Cervantes' classic Don Quixote. Any of you who have read Don Quixote quietly know what it would be like to read it aloud. He holds the record for receiving the most earphone awards for excellence in narration given by AudioFile magazine, which has named him one of the original golden voices in the audiobook industry. Along with his award-winning work as a narrator, he's also enjoyed a 40-year career in the theater, including starring roles on Broadway in such plays as Chapter 2, Cafe Crown, Alone Together in Cold Storage. He's received an Obie Award also for Best Performance Off-Broadway, and has shared the stage at the New York Shakespeare Festival with Kevin Kline, Morgan Freeman, Meryl Streep, and Tracy Ullman. He's toured Europe and the Near East with Helen Hayes in The Glass Menagerie, Miracle Worker, and The Skin of Our Teeth, and his performances in regional theaters range from Shakespeare classics to contemporary comedies to Chekhov. And he's also appeared on TV in Law & Order, has appeared on most daytime television series, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you George Guidall.
Oh, that was a nice nap. Was it comfortable? I take those 10-minute naps when somebody does that. It's very helpful. Thank you. You did that very well. You ever think of recording a book or anything? Yes, it's a long walk from Des Moines. Thank you, everyone, for coming out here to find out what it's all about. I appreciate all of you being here. There's so much to tell you in so little time. First, I have to tell you that it's not always wonderful for me to be here in front of you because Let me give you an example. I was doing one of these programs with Tony Hillerman, and after the program, someone came up to me and said, "Mr. Guidall, my wife thinks you have the sexiest voice in the audiobook industry. Now that I see you, I'm not worried." So I want you to understand the ambivalence here of I don't care if you close your eyes. I'm the only performer who's going to say that. You can close your eyes and listen to me. I was telling Rob that, I was telling someone, my friend, the truck driver, I forgot your name. Where are you? There you are. I was telling him the story of the first time I did one of these books. My father was not happy about my being an actor. Took it with him, and the next day he looked at me and he said, "It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. I listened to that book, and in 5 minutes I was fast asleep." So there's mixed feelings going on. I feel a little bit like Frank Morgan in Wizard of Oz. You're coming up to the city of Oz, and you hear this voice of the wizard talking, and you open the curtain, and you see this little old man, we're turning the knobs and things. So I'm not little, but that's the way it goes. It's kind of like a hermit crab of literature, kind of scuttling along the currents of whatever literature is out there, and finding a home in someone else's imagined truth. And if you think about that for a moment, that's what it becomes. That's what actors deal with, imagined truths, to make believe it's real. You have to believe it yourself. So we're going to get into a little discussion about the artistic process. The subtitle of this program is Sunday Afternoon with George, or whatever, but it's The Art and Artifice of Audiobook Narration. And there's a lot of tricks and gimmicks and devices that we use. I did Hunchback of Notre Dame many years ago when we first started doing this, one of my earlier books. It's a wonderful book, by the way, as a recording goes. And the book itself has a wonderful travelogue of Paris at that time. It's beautifully written. But we were looking for the voice of Quasimodo, the Hunchback. And, of course, I knew the film with Charles Laughton. And then we're trying all kinds of things. He has a deformed mouth. He has one or two teeth. And he's challenged in many areas. And we were just trying to find the right sound, and it just wasn't working. So I asked the people outside the booth, just turn around and close your eyes and don't look at me. And they all turned around, closed their eyes, and I said, "Oh, all that I ever loved." And they said, "Oh, that was great, George. How'd you do that?" And I said, "That's talent, that's all. That's all it is." So I may have spoiled it for you. If you're going to go and listen to Hunchback of Notre Dame, you're going to imagine this idiot saying, "Oh, I say, but it doesn't matter." Incidentally, as I talk, I'm going to read a few things for you, but we'll talk about the process. Anytime you have a question, please raise your hand, because it works best. It's a give and take. I have to thank you all for being here, because, of course, if you weren't here, I wouldn't be here. Over the 14 or 15 years that I've been doing this, it started out as a gig between shows. I found out there were people recording books, and I can do that. And I tried and tried and tried. I made discs, demonstration discs and tapes. No one would answer me. I would call, and this time there were only 2 companies doing it, plus American Foundation for the Blind, which does talking books. And I was doing the part in Chapter 2 on Broadway, and this guy came up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Bill Howell. I do talking books. Would you like to do some talking books?" And one of my selves said, "You son of a gun, I've been sending you letters for the past 3 years. Where have you been?" But my other self said, "Why, sure, I'd love to." And thus something happened, and I started doing it then. And still gig between shows, and he gave me a couple of westerns to do. And from New Jersey, of course, I was typecast doing cowboys, and kept doing that. And after a while, I said, I can do other things too. And little by little, it got a momentum going, and I realized there was something else in this. And I didn't realize what else there was until I landed in recorded books and started recording pretty steadily. There's a very special relationship between us. Those of you who listen to me and have nothing better to do, there's a special thing that happens between the listener and the voice. Forget it's me, just the voice that's telling you a story. Once you make that connection, what happens is that a lot of people go into the library and say, I want a book by George Guidall. And it doesn't matter what the book is, because you have that relationship going with that voice that somehow makes you comfortable. Somehow it does something nice to you, even if it's a horror story. It doesn't matter. Even if it's something terrible. Something about it relaxes you and lowers your blood pressure. And if you're like my father, you fall fast asleep, or not. And we're going to talk about that relationship a little bit. And it's an amazing thing, and that's why I'm thanking you, because I realize that I've been doing this for so long now, you in this room are members of the same family of an audience I had in Las Vegas, or in Nebraska, or California, because you've all experienced a book the same way. So your idea of who, say, Quillerin in the Cat Who books, or Crime and Punishment, whatever the book is, you can talk to someone from another state whom you don't even know and share that experience. That's amazing when you really think about it. You've all experienced, those of you who've listened to Don Quixote, you've all experienced the same voices, so that you and that other person have both been there in the immediacy of that event. And immediacy is something that makes a recording click for you. The prime responsibility of a narrator is to make you feel that the action is happening as it's being read. And we'll go into some of those tricks. There was a, yes, go ahead. Well, Recorded Books is a large company, and they have a quarterly quota of books to put out each year. Most of their books are picked by our rights division, people who know what the bestsellers are. And the best analogy of that is that if you're on a bus or an airplane, let's say an airplane, there's first class, a few seats. Coach, there's a lot of seats and some in the back. So bestsellers and sellers are prominent. We can squeeze in a few classics in there somewhere and some specialty items. And Recorded Books has grown so that we have various logos. There's Western, Recorded Books Western, Recorded Books Inspirational, Recorded Books, there's another one too, Romance, which we call bodice rippers. It's real. And no, I'm not an arbiter of taste. Some of them are really very funny. But my mistake, I made one. I'll be with you in a minute. One time I was reading, I was at a library, and I read a piece of a bodice snatcher, and someone asked me how I felt about that book, and I said, well, it's not my favorite. And 3 librarians in the back said, oh, we love those books. So I never pass judgment anymore. Yes?
At first, I thought I wouldn't like audiobooks and stuff like that, because I thought that when you use the same voice for every character, that it would be a little bit awkward.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it more pleasant.
Terrific, yeah. The voices thing is an interesting phenomenon. I had a letter from a guy who listened to a book by Tony Hillerman, and there was a word in there, Placer, mining. You say placer, you say placer. You say tomato, he says tomato. Well, it is placer. Who said placer? Smarty. I'm from New Jersey. We don't have placer mining in New Jersey. I saw the word Placer, and it was placer to me, and nobody else found it either. So it went into the book, and it's in the book still. But I got this irate, furious letter from a guy out in Nevada. And he's, my God, I've always been a fan of Mr. Guidall's, and how dare he make such an egregious error to say placer, and he just didn't, he missed it totally, and there's no research. And not only did Mr. Guidall make that mistake, but all the other characters in the book made the same mistake. So, of course, I wrote him back a letter saying I told everyone else about The letters I get are amazing, and that's what I mean by thanking you for being as devoted to the art form as you are. It doesn't matter if you listen to me or not. It's just that people poo-pooed it. I must tell you, librarians didn't let us in at the beginning. They would not let us in. A recorded book? How dare you? And now, of course, we're in the same bed. I mean, it's done a heck of a lot for patrons in a library, and it's opened up literature in a way that they didn't realize was possible. People write me letters saying, I read that book years ago, and then when I listened to you do it, it was a whole new experience. It just enriched it for me. So whenever you hear somebody poo-poo audiobooks, it's not a question of which is better. They're two entirely different art forms, and they both enrich each other. After listening to a book, you go back and read it, and you cannot possibly read it the same way you did before. And it opens your mind to what imagination can do for you. Any questions so far? Yes? Mm-hmm. I can meet some, not all of them. A lot of them don't even know I'm doing it. It's done separately. Their rights are gotten to a book, and somewhere the author gets a check in the mail. Once in a while, I've done about 910 or 11 books. 2 authors have asked for a vocal audition. Doesn't that amaze you? It amazes me. If I wrote a book, I'd sure as hell want to know who's going to say my words. One was Wally Lamb, only because his abridged version of I Know This Much Is True came out first, and the abridgment version, it's a story about about a set of twins, not twins, I'm sorry, 2 brothers. One is schizophrenic and one is not. And it's the story of the one who is not and living with this burden. And the person who read the book read the mentally ill one is kind of like he was retarded. And it really upset Lamb and said, I'm not going to let anybody read my books unless I hear it first. And I was lucky enough that he liked what I did with it. And the other one was Elie Wiesel for Night and the others that I've done for him. And I respect that. I would think an author would want to know who is going to give life to his words. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what is actually happening. I think after all these years, the secret behind our relationship is a basic human need that's being satisfied by the narrator. We need to listen to stories. We cannot live, we cannot be conscious without a story going in our heads. If no one is telling us a story, what do we hear? Our own stories. We're talking to ourselves. But we cannot live without some kind of ongoing narrative in our lives. And when that need is fulfilled pleasantly or perfectly or with deep feeling, that need is reinforced and a relationship starts between the source of that information and the receiver. So that recording a book and telling a story, I work in a very small sound booth. There's one person sitting on the other side of the glass, and that's where I do what I do. But your faces are out there for me, and each time I come and do a program like this, I take you all back with me because those are the people, you are the people I'm talking to, and your constant devotion to this, your constant commitment to this audiobook phenomenon is what keeps me going. And it's at first it swelled my head, and I was cocky as hell. Now my head's not swollen anymore. And I realized that there's a great feeling of responsibility. On the contrary, it makes me humble because it's a hell of a job because I know what you're expecting. So that when I sit down to read it, to start a book going, there's hundreds of people out there saying, yeah, well, come on, do it for me. And that's a tremendous challenge. And I thank you again for it. You had your hand up? Yeah.
Are you actually reading a book, or is that, I know your team?
Smart lady. He said, the fellow said Each one of these is a page turning. He said, the fella, I followed him. Any S or an F sound covers the page noise. It's as simple as that. See that? And worked on it for a long time. A lot of readers work with papers and just copies of the book, and or they stop at the end of a page. Over the years, I've realized that's time, and it's not necessary. So I prepared as I read one page, my fingers slowly going down the page, and when I see that sibilant sound, and it goes. Once in a while, I miss, but it certainly helps it. But yes, there's a reason for that. Page turnings are. When I listen to audiobooks, and I hate to listen to audiobooks, it's, oh, God. First of all, nobody else knows what they're doing. And when I listen to myself, I can't stand what I'm doing. So I always say, oh, why'd they let me do that? Oh, why'd they let me get away with that? Kind of thing. So it's like a busman's holiday. It drives me crazy when I'm in the car with my wife. My wife wants to listen to it. And I say, oh, my God, how can you listen to that? So let's take it a little bit about what happens when I'm given a book. Of course, I read a book first, have to. Every book has about 3 or 4 major characters. What of the book? If they have more, it's not as good a book. Other characters are peripheral, important, but usually the narrative line of a book holds on to 3, maybe 4 major characters. And those voices have to be pretty much within a real range. You can't fool around with that too much because the audience they'll hear you do that. But it's the peripheral parts, the parts that show up for a page or 2 pages that you can pretty much have fun with. But there's a narrative concept that I look for. I cannot do a book unless I know why the author is telling the story. Why is Tony Hillerman telling that story? Why is Lillian Jackson Braun telling you that story? And when I find that reason, then it kicks me into the book. For example, the reason, let me go this way. When Lillian Jackson Braun, so how many people here listen to the Cat Who books, first of all? All right, there's enough people. Lillian Jackson Braun writes a book about 2 Siamese cats who help this guy Quillerin solve murders. They live 400 miles north of everywhere, somewhere on the upper Michigan Peninsula. They're all crazy in that city. They are weird characters. There's always a murder, an arson, a burglary, some kind of going on, but nobody cares because they're funny. Nobody cares because the 2 cats, one cat will scratch a book that begins with the letter B, the other cat will hide a piece of jewelry, but somebody that the cat knows is guilty, whatever. That's what we're looking for. So the reason for that book, the narrative concept of that book is, I want to make you smile. I want you to sit back and not think about your mortgage, not think about taxes, not think about the war, not think about anything, just have fun. And that's a narrative concept. So it dictates to me the kind of intonation, the kind of attack that you'll say. When you're going to tell somebody a joke, you have a certain tone of voice, you have a certain delivery. That's the same kind of thing. Tony Hillerman is a totally different thing. Tony Hillerman, I picture sitting on his porch in his ranch with a long piece of grass in his mouth and kind of his boots up on a corral fence and saying, I want to tell you a little story about some of the guys I hang around with. And as I think about that, the dialect starts, a little twang starts, and there's a narrative concept. There are many authors there's an author called Thomas Cook who writes wonderful mysteries. Wonderful. Thomas H. Cook, his name is. Most of his books don't end until the last page. Literally, the last page. And some of them are very, very dark. Some of his books reveal a very dark side of human nature, murder and mystery, the way people think, the way they perceive the world around them. I have to know the way the book ends in order to start it, because I'm telling you that story. There's a reason why I'm telling you the story. So I either want you to think that the book is going to end a certain way, or I don't want you to think the book is going to end a certain way. So that end game becomes very, very important. So that narrative concept, which is really a way of jump-starting me into an imagined truth. I mean, look at the progress that books on tape have made. It started, this essential human need to hear a story, started a caveman in the Stone Age. And Ukuk went out to hunt the saber-toothed tiger. Spent all day, came back to the cave and said, "Hello, yeah, Everybody knew what he was saying. And they were sitting in a cave around the fire, and they had a vicarious experience of what it meant for Uk to kill that tiger. He could have been lying. Didn't matter, because they still had the same experience, right? So this then became, Uk realized, I can go out there and tell them anything I want, because they're going to listen to me. They're waiting for me to come sit by the fire and tell them the story, right? And he can say, everybody knew what he was saying for the same reason. He was telling that story. And what happened? Time went, and this terrible thing called a book was invented. And we held it in our hand and read it for ourselves and told ourselves that story. Still hearing that story in our mind's voice. And it went on for a few years, and then what happened? Something called the wireless, or the radio, was invented. And we sat in our caves and turned the lights down and listened to programs and mysteries and westerns in the radio. The family was still there, still felt comfortable, safe, protected, and together in a tribal kind of unity. And what happened after that? Then they had invented something called movies. And what did you do? You went into a big black cave and saw the story coming at you. And that need was still continuing to be fulfilled. And now, I guess the caves are your SUVs, and the saber-toothed tigers are the 18-wheelers that go by. And I get letters from people saying, thank you, I no longer have road rage. I wait for traffic jams. They said to me, my wife stays in that car with the shopping. She brings the frozen food in. It's beginning to melt because she didn't want to come out of the car until the chapter was over. Or I'm always 10 minutes late to work because I have to go around the block and keep going until I hear the end of the chapter. That's how important it is. We laugh at it because it's funny, of course, but it's essential to our well-being. We need that stuff. And that's what I began to realize over the years, that this is an important thing, that it does a lot of good for people. Any questions so far? Yes. I prefer reading well-written literature. Doesn't matter what form it is. Unfortunately, there's not too much of that around. There are lots of good books around, but I gravitate towards the classics. I gravitate towards things of depth and human marvel. I don't get a chance to do it too often because there aren't too many of them around. But as I was saying what is your name? Jim and Paul Gillespie. I was talking about what you do when you get a bad book. And God knows there are bad books that I've done. I'm going to read you some parts of some bad books. Someone once told me a long time ago, a professional is someone who loves what he does, even when he doesn't love doing it. And that saved me through many, many turkeys, let me tell you. So what does the narrative concept do? The narrative concept, once I get that emotional push into an imagined truth, it changes the art form. It changes the art form from the literary art form into the spoken art form. Now we're getting into the art of what it is I allegedly do. So let's compare it a little bit with a work of art, a painting, and a recorded book, right? So the inspiration that a painter has is whatever he's looking at, whatever he wants to see. For a reader, the inspiration is the book. That's where it comes from. That's where it all is. So if I want to paint this story for you, what would I need next? I have the inspiration. What do you think this artist on the parallel with a painter would need before a canvas? The inspiration is the book. He needs a palette of colors. He needs to be able to mix the paints and get the colors he wants before he puts it on the canvas. And where is that color? Not quite. Not quite. That's the tricky part. The colors are in the empathic response of the narrator. Depending who that person is telling you the story, how that person reacts to that imagined truth in him is going to have a great deal to do with what colors go on that canvas. Two narrators can read the same book totally differently, depending on who they are. I'm going to be 23 years old soon. Now, if I'm faced with a 70-year-old narrator reading some basic thing about life, chances are, if they're both good, that 70-year-old narrator is going to know a hell of a lot more than me at 20, whatever I am. So do you understand what I'm saying? So that the empathic response of that narrator begins to mix colors in him. As he's into this imagined truth, this shell, he's beginning to see certain colors at work. So now, what does he need? He's got the colors mixed on the palette. Now what does he need? Brush. And what's the narrator's brush? His voice, right. So that's the next thing a narrator needs, is a voice flexible enough and able to paint these colors correctly, so that the technique, the technical ability of the narrator becomes very important. I'm lucky. I don't do anything to my voice. I'm lucky. It's a blessing, believe me. Other narrators smoke. I used to smoke all the time when I read, early on. I used to read with a cigarette in my hand, and between paragraphs, used to take a puff. You'd never heard it. And I would talk with the smoke coming out like I was Frank Sinatra or something. And it was awful. It was terrible. But as I realized this was something more than just a gig between shows, I realized this responsibility was a little heavier. And I began to be careful of what I do with my throat. And I was given, or I found, whatever voice I have, and I use it as best I can. I was a trained actor, means I studied voice for 3 years. I went to school. I wanted to be a Shakespearean actor. I was for about 4 or 5 years, until the tights had so many holes in them I couldn't wear them. And the voice has been there this time, and it so the voice begins to be the brush to take parts of my empathic response to the material to put it on the canvas. Now, what's the canvas? You, yes. What part of you? What part of you? Yes, right, on the nose. It's your empathic response. Now watch what happens. If whatever response I had to the material with my feelings match yours, and your feelings and mine come together, we have a relationship. And that defines a relationship, doesn't it? You and some other person you meet on the street, you begin to talk and you say, gee, what is it I like about that guy? Oh, he speaks like I do, or he feels the way I do about somebody, rather than walking away. So there's where our relationship starts. When your feelings about what I'm feeling, you can be moved by that. Then the canvas begins to get color. The canvas begins to take on life. There's one more thing that happens. We can really beat this metaphor to death. Okay, we've got the colors on the canvas. Your empathic response, my empathic response. You got the voice, got the brush, got everything. What do we do with it? You got to frame it. Soon, we got to frame it. And that frame is that narrative concept that I spoke of. That frame of the narrative concept, the emotional raison d'etre of this whole piece, the emotional reason why it's being said, holds it together and unifies it. And then I want to hang it in the gallery, which is your mind's eye, so that you can see what I've painted. And that's really the meat of the process. Whether a narrator knows he does that or not, I happen to have the gift of gab, so I can say that. Another narrator who may be very good doesn't know that, but that's what he's doing. If it's working, that's what the actor is doing. Any questions before I give you an example? Okay, I want to read you just a little bit of a piece from Marcel Proust's in Swann's Way. Don't get afraid. It's not very heavy. It's Proust talking about his mother reading to him, and it's going to lock into your minds everything that I've been talking about up to this point. It's self-explanatory. I have to tell you about. If my mother was not a faithful reader, she was nonetheless admirable when reading a work in which she found the note of true feeling by the respectful simplicity of her interpretation and by the sound of her sweet and gentle voice, taking pains to banish from her voice any weakness or affectation which might have blocked its channel for that powerful stream of language. She supplied all the natural tenderness, all the lavish sweetness which they demanded, to phrases which seemed to have been composed for her voice. and which are all, so to speak, within her compass. She came to them with the tone that they required, but which is not to be found in the words themselves. And by these means, she smoothed away, as she read on, any harshness there might be, or discordance, guided the sentence that was drawing to an end towards that which was waiting to begin, now hastening, now slackening the pace of the syllables, so as to bring them, despite their difference of quantity, into a uniform rhythm, and breathed into this quite ordinary prose a kind of life, continuous and full of feeling. My agony was soothed. I let myself be borne upon the current of this gentle night, on which I had my mother by my side. And that's a good narrator, his mother. And that's what I'm talking about. Now, let me show you the artifice in this. You just heard the art. Now I want to give you the artifice, right? There are words. The only tools that I have on the paper are the words the author gives me. Even though this is a translation, it's not a bad translation at all. Notice what happens when I say, she smoothed away. Someone else could say, she smoothed away any harshness. It doesn't work the same way. She smoothed, that voiced TH, she smoothed away. Onomatopoeically, I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to say that word. It makes you feel what that word is doing physically. She smoothed away, and what comes right after that? Any harshness. And I hit that SH and the S at the end of the word because it's a total contrast to smoothed. And those things, you don't know that, but I look for things like that to take you along with me. Any harshness there might be, or discordance. Listen to that one, or discordance. Then we come down to, and breathed into this ordinary life. You could say, and breathed into this ordinary life. Doesn't quite make it. And breathed into this ordinary life. It's a musical note. Ordinary. And you hear, and it's ordinary when you say, this ordinary life. My agony was soothed. Look what happens when you say the word agony. You have to close the back of your throat. Agony. And that forceful opening of your glottis gets that air coming out, and agony becomes agony, is soothed, and you get that voiced TH again. And these are the little tricks, and these are the artifice that makes you say, gee, this guy thinks he knows what he's doing, that kind of thing, and it works. So that was Marcel Proust. I want to show you what I mean by people's devotion. I don't want to go without saying that people, lots of Lady and Jackson Braun fans. They're all over the country. When I was given the first Lady and Jackson Braun book to read, I didn't want to read it. It was stupid. It was silly. It was trivial. It was inane. It was vapid. Who cares about these crazy people up there with two cats who solve murders? Well, my time is more valuable. Well, she said to me, just do one, George. Just do one book. So I did the one book, and I was glad I got rid of it. Letters started coming in. Quillerin lives, and cards still come in. They send me postcards. They send me telling me how much they love the work. She moved from Baltimore to Kansas, and she listened to all the cat books. They send me all, and here's a wonderful one. I just love them because it's such a connection. Here's one that says, I wonder if you could get the enclosed picture to George Guidall. The family cats love to listen to Mr. Guidall narrate the cat who whispers. They come flocking to the front room when I turn the stories on and sit in my lap. There's one more cat, but he's antisocial and was sitting across the room. And here she is, sitting at her typewriter. All the cats around her, sitting on bookcases, on tables. It's a messy apartment, but she's doing it. So, I mean, what better thing can an actor ask for? They send me pictures of puppy dogs and cats. I love that. Here's one of my favorites. Now, Lady Jackson Braun, those of you who read her, listened to her, I think you probably sense that her later books are not quite as good as her earlier books. They kind of let a little air out, so they seem a little less tight. Well, here's a lady that says, just a note to let you know I'm one of your fans, really like your voice, etc., etc. I'm addicted to the Cat Who books, to the early ones only. I own several of the early ones in books and cassettes, and you put me to sleep every night. Perhaps if her last few books were written better, you could read them a little better. As it is, you seem to be in too much of a hurry. Perhaps you don't like them either. Oh, boy. I sent her back a letter saying, how perceptive of you. Here's one of my favorites also. My husband and I have enjoyed listening to George Guidall for a long time. I've often selected titles just because he read them, but we have no idea just how magical his voice is. We have discovered that we must have books read by him on trips because our cat is fascinated by his voice. On other trips, we have had to endure marathon howling, but when we put in a tape with him reading, she instantly becomes quiet and remains that way, except for hard bumps in the road and changes of tapes. Thank you, George. It's amazing. 4 cats in a tub. I just want to say thank you for the enjoyable hours I've listened to you read the Cat Who books. You really bring the characters alive, especially Quillen, who, believe it or not, I did not read him with an American accent when I first read the book for myself. This is a book from a card from a lady in Newgate, Dorking, Surrey, England. She read it with an English accent because that's the way she speaks. Of course, I knew he was American, but you now have made him a real person. Just wanted you to know how much pleasure you could. To take the time to write this card, it's the best. It's the best. And besides, incidentally, what the other letters said is something that drives my wife crazy when she's here, when she comes to these programs, because invariably somebody's going to say, I go to sleep with your husband every night. She gets tired of hearing that. There's also the other side of these letters, which is the kind to make you stand up and realize what else you're doing. You have a tendency to be glib and make the jokes and laugh at these cute letters. And here's somebody that says, I've been listening to recorded books for approximately 14 years. Don't think I've ever written a book report. I've listened to many books. George Guidall has always been one of my favorite performers. In my opinion, this work is a masterpiece. She's talking about a book called The Corrections, Jonathan Franz. Anybody ever read that? Listen to it? If you think your family was dysfunctional, wait till you read this book. Mr. Guidall gives each character in the novel their own distinctive voice, a voice which reflects each one's interior life. For me, perhaps the 2 best are Denise and Alfred Lambert. These are the parents, probably the 2 most difficult to depict. I lost my father to Parkinson's disease, and Mr. Guidall's portrayal of Mr. Lambert with his disease was so accurate, at times it was almost too painful to continue listening, but I had my father back. Thank you. So you begin to read the letter with that same wise guy attitude that I have, and then this sentence grabs you and you say, oh my God, it does other things. Here's one of my favorite ones. This is something you get by recorded books. They give you a little evaluation sheet. And this was a book called Hidden Empire, Kevin Anderson, science fiction book. It says, good book, narration sucked. Keeps my feet on the ground, they say. I was near the library in Washington. There's each pillar in Washington, D.C., each pillar around the library has certain quotes of authors written. And I noticed one that said, I think it was Emily Dickinson, if I'm not mistaken, a word is dead when it is said, some say. I say it just begins to live that day. And it always stayed in the back of my mind as that's interesting. After all, I deal with spoken words. And then I get this letter that says, I'm currently in the process of returning my first recorded books rental today, Don Quixote. I found myself complimenting the practiced command of the Spanish language combined with the overall quality of his comprehension. I don't speak Spanish. I have tried to personally read this classic tale more than once without success. Mr. Guidall made it come alive for me at last, and now it will always be mine. And when you think of that it's the same kind of gratitude that comes to me by knowing that this man will always hear my Don Quixote and my Sancho Panza. It's not ego that I'm talking about. It's a kind of a, wow, I am lucky that this guy is walking around with my imagined truth. And you speak of a relationship that the listener does have with the reader, and that's a perfect example. Questions? Yes. Recorded Books only does unabridged books. And so do I. Yeah, you wouldn't want to eat a T-bone steak without the bone. I don't know. A lot of books, as far as I'm concerned, could benefit from a little abridgment. Yes, but that's in the publishing company. Usually they have an abridged. Sometimes, Paul, do they have abridged and unabridged of the same book? Don't they have that as well? Yeah, they do that some. And the authors don't really mind because it's a living. You know, there are some authors that refuse to have their books abridged, and Wally Lamb is one of them. Oh, yes. Well, listen, Hunchback of Notre Dame, I saw in the store with 2 cassettes. That's not Hunchback of Notre Dame. How can you do that in good conscience? And I guess, guys between conferences or something, maybe, but it's hard to say. So that's the decisions made by publishing companies. We have nothing to do with that. Somebody else had a hand up somewhere? Yes. I've been doing it there so long that they know there are certain books not to give me. I don't like exploitative sex and violence for sensation's sake. If the sex and the violence is a part of the human condition that's being portrayed, then I'll go along with that. But if it's just there for sensationalism, I would say no, I don't want it. Because of you out there, you expect something from me. In fact, I'll give you a perfect example. Here you are. This is a card that says, you're only young once, but you can stay immature indefinitely. But she says, you're a brilliant narrator, such fun to listen to. I have heard all the tapes about it. You are a joy to listen to and really bring this guy, James Quiller, into life, and you make me laugh all the time. However, I checked out Stone Kiss by Kellerman only because you were the narrator and was very disappointed at the trash that spewed from your mouth. The readings seemed way below your dignity. Your readings have spoiled me because now I am quite critical of other narrators. Few have your abilities, and a couple of times I could only suffer to listen for 15 minutes. Please stick to Lillian Jackson Braun. Can't please everybody, can you? So did that answer your question? So there was a book, for example, Lawrence Block wrote a book called Small Town, which I absolutely loved. It was one of the first books that came out after 9/11. It has some of the weirdest, wildest sexual content I have ever read, but it all belongs there because it's the insanity of the time, and that part of that reflection. And that was an example of something. Other books, they know not to do that to me. Can't do it. I have kids and a wife, and yes. Oh, no, but just let me go to this. Yes.
Do you have any other audiobook
Narrators that I enjoy their work? I don't listen to other narrators. I'm serious. I can't. It drives me crazy. Because, if you do it for a while, I can't listen to myself for the same reason. There's so many choices. When you're reading a book, and especially a good book, and there's an emotional grade going up or down, somebody's experiencing something, you're on a roll, you're on a toboggan, you're sliding down as you read. And don't forget, I've read the book once, right? So I perhaps have marked it out with kind of almost musical intonations, and I'm going. So you can't possibly think of all the possible choices you could make, because most of those creative decisions are made as you're doing it. It's an imagined event in your mind, so it's happening there. And sometimes when you have a very good director, and for example, Don Quixote, I had a wonderful, wonderful woman who was my engineer and director. She spoke fluent Spanish. She had the Spanish book and the English book in front of her. And she would stop me all the time, saying, you could do it this way, you could do it that way. And because of that, it's a much richer experience. When I listen to other narrators, there are some good ones around. I have some favorite narrators only because I speak to them in the studio and the way they talk. And sometimes I listen to what they were doing. Davina Porter is a female narrator who is just wonderful. Davina Porter is one. Tom Steckschulte is another one. but not too many. Not too many. And it's not from, ego, it's just from there are too many missed opportunities. And when I listen to myself, even Don Quixote or some of the other ones, God, how could they let me do that? I could have done it much better. It's my obsessive personality. Yes? The market for demographics. Paul, can you? Stand up. This is my younger brother, Paul, who sells recorded books for the company.
Actually, what's been exciting is I think the demographic is stretching, it's growing. And we're seeing, traditionally, a recording book listener was 35 to 55 in their car. That was the typical listener. But I think we're seeing that as this format has matured, that it's spreading to places. When I first started, this was a lot of fun. I started about 6 years ago. I would ask my brain, what's the most unusual place for a movie?
Careful.
But I found out all sorts of neat things. I don't know what's fun. And my favorite one was guys out there that practice your people, listening to audio. I thought,
Fantastic.
all those years cultivating quality, I could have all those books. So I think it's actually growing pretty good.
Yeah, it is that. Yes. Sure is. I'll tell you, I'll come back to it. I did a show down in a retirement community down in New Jersey, and as I was doing my thing, I noticed there was a guy sitting in the front row just with such an expression of angst in his face. He was just listening so hard. And when the show ended, his wife came over to me and said, I'd like you to meet my husband. He's blind, and he can only see a little bit in one eye. And I came up to him, and he grabbed my hand, but literally grabbed my hand and shook and said, you saved my life. You saved my life. He had some kind of disease that happened overnight, that he lost his sight and his hearing. And his hearing started to come back, and he said, the first thing I heard was your voice, because my wife had earphones on me as I was coming out of the sickness. And since then, your voice is, and he was just so intense. I started to cry. It was unbelievable. Perfect stranger. And we were so entwined together, which is an amazing thing. Yes, it does. It opens up a hell of a lot. Yes. I read it to myself for that narrative concept, for the end game, for the kind of what's the author want to do? Does he want to start out with a sardonic thing, a sarcastic thing, or innocent thing? And that's all. And I do, one of the things we do well in recorded books, which is I don't think any other company does, we have an incredible research department. We have a guy who speaks several languages, 5, 6 languages. He can read several others. And we do a lot of research. So when I do the book, I make a list of words I have no idea where they come from or who says them. And he tells me. So there are books, The Gates of Fire by Pressman is an example. It's a wonderful historical fiction of the Greek wars. There were 33 pages of Greek villages that no longer exist. He speaks Greek, classical Greek. So I was reading the book with 33 pages. So I do have to read the book so I don't have to waste time stopping reading, going to the dictionary, kind of thing like that. Whatever I do myself, I can do myself. But I do, I once read somewhere a narrator that said, no, I never read the book first. I think it stops the creative process. I like to go into the studio and just do it right there. I think that's a lot of malarkey. I think, come on, give me a break. Will you? A guy spends a certain amount of time writing a book. The least he could do is read it. Would he do a play without reading it first? It's baloney. And it's just not fair to another artistic process. In the back. I record from 9 in the morning till around 4 in the afternoon. Now, don't get impressed. I stop. The worse the book, the more I have to stop, because it gets me mad. I'll give you an example. You're on a roll, this emotional roll that I'm talking about, and all of a sudden, the inanity of what you're reading just stops any creative impulse in you. And you say, I can't read this crap. And you go get a cup of coffee. And so, but the better the book, my God, when I did Proust or Dostoevsky or Wally Lamb, I just keep reading until the engineer says, George, I've got to stop. I've got to go to the restroom or something. Because it grabs you and it has that empathic response that I'm being a slave to, and that it just takes you along. Now, so I break for lunch. I do usually at a stretch up to 2 hours, if it's good. Now, just imagine, I'm in the booth, I'm reading a book, and this is what I come upon. The scene is a gym, and our major character is Chet. Most of Chet's dates were women he'd met at one of the multiple health clubs he frequented. For him, ogling women was not just a spectator sport. The woman he was watching, finished with the machine she'd been using. Wasting no time, she got up, glanced up at the wall clock, and then hustled down to the next machine to work her pectorals. Seemingly in a hurry, she started right in. Chet had watched her in the mirror, and in the background, he caught sight of one of the club's employees entering the room. Chet knew him reasonably well from pickup basketball and sensed that he was a savvy dude. At this point, just one eyebrow goes up. I'm still reading, right? But there's a yellow light of caution starting, right? Okay, I'll give him savvy dude. I'll keep going. Sensed that he was a savvy dude, especially since he had some kind of supervisory role. His name was Chuck Horner. Stepping over to the free weight rack, Chet deposited the weights he'd been using and walked over to the employee. Hey, Chuck, Chet said sotto voce. Hey, Chuck, Chet said sotto voce. Do you know that chick using the pectoral machine? Chuck craned his neck to see around Chet. That chick? The chick with the pixie... How do you expect me to do that? Oh, the life of an audiobook narrator. Then, again, you get a letter like this that reminds you what it's all about. There's a man who said, also enjoying the work, over time, I developed an appreciation for the mastery by which the art is conveyed to the patron. And art itself, the medium and the message combine to equal more than their sum. My life is just simply better for the experience, and my gratitude is boundless. I wish I could have said that. I mean, that puts it in a nutshell. The medium and the message combine to equal more than their sum. If anybody says, how can you listen to a book? You tell them that. Incidentally, Paul, since you're the company man, the second line down here, which is highlighted, says, second, the good folks at Recorded Books can't possibly be paying you what you're worth. It's a hint enough, right? Now, some of you probably have heard my voice on introductions to books. All the narrators do introductions, so it doesn't stop. It even happens in introductions. This stuff will get you, and you'll say, what am I reading? Here's an introduction. If you've enjoyed this book and this performance, Recorded Books recommends the next book in the Ghost Walker series by Christine Fian, Conspiracy Game, also narrated by Tom Steckschulte. Ghost Walker Jack Norton is a genetically enhanced telepathic sniper on a mission to rescue his brother in the jungles of the Congo. Then he meets Bryony, a beautiful rebel on a mission of her own and hiding secrets that a shadowy enemy would kill to discover. And I said to Tom, did you read this book? He said, yeah. Some hands, yes. Never been there. No, but he does it for me. He does it, but I've seen enough Westerns in my life, but he does it. He paints those pictures so clearly that I don't have to see it. There's really nothing. That's what an actor does. And a lot of actors, if there's something that you really don't know anything about, then you have to research it and find out. But since I'm reading what's already been painted, I have to see that in my mind's eye to make it live in yours. That's the only way it works there. Did I answer your question? Good. Someone else? Yes? No, that doesn't happen. It's up to me as I'm reading. I can't the pace of what I do is just as important as the colors, as the vocal colors. When action is happening, you're zipping down. When there's a chase or fight or something like that, when it's sensitive and slow, it's got to slow down. So there's no time factor. Sometimes books are on a deadline; they have to go out. So I spend a longer time in the booth doing it. But the pace is just as important it is as anything else in the book. Yes. Was there other hands up somewhere? Yes. Well, it depends on what medication I take in the morning. I don't know what it is. It's an ability to fool around with my voice, and a lot of people can do it, and they don't know they can. I just happen to do it for a living.
Which is something quite different, because you can do anything you want.
With a voice and just talk about. I have to do that because the minute you think who's talking, I'm out. I lose. I cannot let you for a second get out of that immediacy of the event of that's happening to think, no, wait a minute, who was that? Who was that? Can't do that. There's one writer whom I love, Craig Allen Johnson, is that his name? Craig Johnson. He's a wonderful writer. He does good mysteries. They happen in Wyoming. He's a lovely guy. Never does he say he said or she said. In the whole book. Never says it. And you always know who's talking. And he says it's a conscious effort on his part to not have to say that. It's a waste of words. Right? So does that answer your question? I have an idea. The three major characters, they're pretty much straight. But I do have to know if somebody's talking like this. The next person has to be talking like this or like this so that you know that there's a difference, or the pace is different, or there's a dialect that I put in to make the separations work. Patrick Robinson, his stories about submarines. Anybody read Patrick Robinson or listen to it? The whole submarine thing. He likes to have presidential cabinet meetings. So he has 8 people sitting around a table talking about the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Agriculture, and I have to somehow do that. So I pop a few pills and I just make sure, I just let whatever personal prejudice come out. If it says he's a big man, I usually give him a big voice. If he's a sneaky guy like the CIA, I give him a voice that's going to be very quiet. I think that's just my tricks to make you be in it. Someone else, yes? Mm-hmm. C.J. Crit? Is that her name? I think C.J., yes? Jim Dale. Yeah. Well, no, it's not responsible for readers. Jim Dale is a terrific actor and he's one of the best narrators around. So certainly they're going to ask him to do whatever books they want him to ask, and it's good for him. The recorded books, I have an arrangement with the recorded books. I've been recording exclusively for them, so I keep working for recorded books. If the narrator is good, and if it's a series, people like to hear the same voice for the series. So that will lock somebody in, unless they're bad, unless they do it and the person who cast them says, he didn't really make it. So sometimes they'll switch over. Even Stephen King, when Frank Muller was a big Stephen King recorder, and he was in a dreadful motorcycle accident, he couldn't read anymore. And I took over for him then. And still, there were some people who said, I can't stand George Guidall. Frank was the only one to do it. And that's valid. It's real. Yes. So. A book, and you mean the print book and the CD? I don't know if that's their thing. They make audiobooks. Why can't you buy the book and put it with the CD? Huh? Makes sense. You mean to read the book while you listen to it? Is that what? Yeah, that would be. I've suggested that to many people, especially children, especially kids in school. I went into a few schools and had them read the story first out loud. Then I read it for them, and then I read it with them reading with me, so that they found how much control they have on what words. Because most people don't realize the control, that when you can stop. Because when you're reading, you have emotional punctuation. When you're reading silently, you follow the punctuation on the page. When you're talking out loud, you have a totally different punctuation. There are no periods, and I've just said 3 sentences. You know what I mean? So that it's very instructive for them to do that. Yes. Ah, good. Ah, terrific. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Absolutely. There's usually volunteer organizations that do recordings for the blind, and I'm sure they're around here somewhere. I'm sure there's a Lighthouse. Pardon me? Yeah. There's one. So, I mean, there's Lighthouse, there's several organizations that do that, and that's when I started. I started doing it for the blind, and that's the best place for you to do it and see how it works for you. It's a very, very competitive field in where I am. It's New York. My God, you had all the best Broadway actors. Do you know the figure? We audition something like 600 actors a year, and we maybe pick 3 or 4. Because you can be a very fine actor and not be able to narrate a book. You could be a mediocre actor and have a knack for telling a story. So they don't normally go hand in hand. Good luck and right when you get work. Yes. I love it. It's a great challenge. And incidentally, there was just 2 weeks ago, one letter came into the studio saying, I can't stand the way Guidall does female voices. He makes them sound stupid and insipid. And the same week, Audiophile magazine came out, and the reviewer was saying, no one does female voices like George Guidall. So first thing I do is put on a pair of red pumps in the studio. I used to, when I first started, I went up there. I brought my voice all the way. That's so ridiculous. It's not necessary at all. But there is, as you talk, there is a kind of a softening thing that happens, and sometimes the vowels are stretched slightly, and there's a little more melodious content, maybe. But the 50% of that work is she said. And that does half of it for you. But there is a change that I try to do with total respect for the women out there, because I know it's ridiculous. Some readers do that. I've heard readers say, oh, thanks so much for the coffee. Oh, God, you slap them down. Does that answer your question? I mean, someone else had a hand up somewhere. Yes? You mean record more than one book? Yeah. What I do sometimes, there's a guy named Henry Turtledove who writes very long books. They're paperbacks, they're about 600 pages a story. They just go on and on and on. Listen, if you like it, you like it. I do the best I can. But if while I'm doing that book, another one comes in and that has to be done by a certain time, I put that book aside and do the other one. And we can do that because it's done on computer, and we have what we call memory locations. So if I'm doing a book and somebody comes on page 75 that was on page 4, I tell the engineer, let's go to that guy's name, because they memory loced him when I was reading him. So I can always go back and refer and remember a voice that I did, because you can forget it easily. You know? I just remind myself, I was talking to the gentleman there who used to be a truck driver and listening to books all the time. One of the best letters I ever got was from a truck driver. He was driving a pickup truck, and he was driving on the thruway or some superhighway in Montana at night, listening to Crime and Punishment, which is no mean feat. And he was so into it that he forgot his exit. So he stopped and he backed up to get back to his exit into an 18-wheeler, right? He was writing me the letter from the hospital, thanking me for the opportunity he now had to finish listening to the book. That's what, right? Boy. Right. Sure. Right? And blame it on me, yeah. Right? Fantastic. Incredible. Yes? Yes. They're going to do, they did one by Rod Mcullough, who they made a recording first, and then Stephen King listened to it and wrote an article in a magazine about this is the best book you'll never be able to read, and then agents picked it up and published it. And the next book they're going to do is my wife's book. She just published a book called 4 Rooms Upstairs, which is a memoir. My wife's a psychotherapist. It's a memoir of growing up in a home with a mother who was mentally ill. And the powers that be at Recorded Books read it, liked it, and they're going to put it out, which will explain my particular kind of insanity. Yes. No, I don't work on learning more. That's another thing. Some of us just know how to do it. I have no magic answer for that. I didn't really study. I studied voice. I studied speech. I used to have a very thick New York, New Jersey accent. But so I've learned how to talk over that. But no, it just comes to me. I hear it. I'm always listening to people talk to pick up some kind of vocal thing. Are we running short of time? Sure. Someone who didn't have a chance? Yes. Oh, yes, and many. Oh, but we don't say books on tape in my family because that's the competitor. Okay, we say recorded books. Yes. Paul just became pale when you said that. Yes, I've done several of them, and some very, very good ones, too. They're there. One more question, and then we'll do it. And I'm going to read you one last piece, and we can call it a night. This is a piece from I Know This Much Is True. It's probably my favorite recording, only because of the humanity in the book. It took him 7 years to write. He published a book called She's Come Undone, was his first book about a young woman with an eating disorder, and was given a huge check for his second book, and he had no idea what he's going to write. And he pulled up on Hollywood Boulevard. He was on the West Coast at that time, and at a red light, and a red pickup truck pulled up next to him, and the guy had painting materials, house painter, in the back of his pickup truck, ladders and tarps and stuff, and the guy was sitting at the steering wheel, banging the steering wheel with all his might, and just saying, so he couldn't hear what he was saying, but he was obviously in great duress. And he said, I have to write about that man. And that's how I Know This Much Is True started. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. It's an amazing story about love, brotherhood, family, guilt, mental health. It's a wonderful piece. And this is just a short scene where his brother, who is schizophrenic, is in the hospital, and a psychiatrist, Indian woman, educated in England, is his doctor and is playing the tapes of her sessions with him to Dominic, who is the brother who is not mentally ill. And the rest, I think, will take care of itself. I'm trying to understand you, to help you if I can. There was a deep, impatient sigh. Speaking in a revved-up mumble, Thomas began to murmur scripture. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bend on earth shall be bound in heaven. Thomas stopped. He came up for air. Are you following me, Mrs. Gandy, huh? I'm a fisher of souls, the keeper of the keys. It's not my idea, it's God's. How do you like them apples, Susie Q? Susie Q? Why am I Susie Q? How should I know why you're Susie Q? Go ask Susie Wong. Go check in with Susie McNamara. Go shit in your hat while you're at it. I was leaning forward, staring at the tape recorder. When I looked up at Dr. Patel, I saw that she was watching me. What? I said, raising my hand. She stopped the tape. What is it, Mr. Birdsey? Nothing. Probably. It's just that I don't even know if it means anything, but that was what my stepfather used to call my mother sometimes, Susie Q. For a second there, he sounded like Ray, my stepfather. Was Susie Q your mother's nickname? Her name was Susan? No, her name was Concertina, Connie. My stepfather used to call her Susie Q when he was... Yes? Suddenly I felt overwhelmed, shaky, demoted back to my childhood. When he was mad at her, when he was ridiculing her. She jotted something down. That's helpful, Mr. Birdsey. Thank you. This is exactly why I wanted to play the tape for you. You can provide insights and observations that I cannot get from reading your brother's medical records. Please feel free to interrupt the tape whenever there is something you want to tell me. I nodded. He's not usually like that, you know, I said. Thomas, he's not. Like what? Snotty, sarcastic, that go shit in your hat stuff. She nodded. It's all right, Mr. Birdsey. I hear much worse in the course of a day. After some of the things I hear, go shit in your hat sounds almost courtly to me. She put her finger on the play button, then took it off again. Your stepfather, she said, was he often derisive? I didn't answer at first. Then I nodded. Relax, Mr. Birdsey. I am relaxed. She looked unconvinced. Really, I am. Look at your hands, she said. Listen to your breathing. Each hand was a fist. My breathing was fast and shallow. I flexed my fingers back and forth. Better? She said. I'm fine. He sounds pretty fried, though, doesn't he, my brother, huh? On the tape? Fried? He's worse, worse than he was when he was at the other hospital, right after he did that to himself. I was hoping that when you said you'd made some progress today, I was hoping. That's when I lost it. My chest heaved. My sobs came from nowhere. Dr. Patel handed me her box of tissues. I looked away from her, blew my nose. I thought when I came in here and saw this Kleenex box that you had them on hand for, I don't know, hysterical housewives or something. Women whose husbands just dumped them. I feel like a jerk. Grief has no gender, Mr. Birdsey, she said. I took another tissue, blew my nose again. Is that what this is? Grief? Why wouldn't you grieve, Mr. Birdsey? Your twin brother is, as you said, an abandoned house. If no one is home, then someone is missing. So you grieve. I stuffed the used tissue into my shirt pocket, handed her back the box. Yeah, but you'd think by now, you figure you got a lid on things, and then, Mr. Birdsey, human beings are not like, those plastic containers, what are they called? The ones Americans buy at parties. At parties? Tupperware, you mean? Yes, that's it. People are not like Tupperware, with their lids on securely. Nor should they be, although the more I work with American men, the more I see it is their perceived ideal. Which is nonsense, really. Very unhealthy, Mr. Birdsey. Not something to aspire to at all. Never. She was waving that scolding finger at me again. I looked over at her grinning Buddha statue. Hey, Doc, do me a favor, will you? I said. Call me Dominic. Yes. Very good, Dominic. Shall we go on then? Well, thank you. Thank you. I just give you a sidelight into this. At some point in my career, just to make it short, I know we have a time problem, I reevaluated my theater career, and I realized as I went with my wife to various conferences and psychological meetings, etc., that I really wanted to be a therapist. And at the age of 49, I went back to school, got my bachelor's and master's in social work, and I became a therapist. I specialized in couples therapy and worked at a clinic for about 9-10 years. And while I was doing recorded books, I was doing audiobooks and being a therapist. I was a therapist when I did this book. And this doctor taught me more than any of my teachers in social work school. She's an incredible character. So that's how that empathic response came out in this book. A lot of people have asked me if I want to retire. No, I don't. I don't want to retire. But I do have my epitaph all picked out. Here it comes, ready? It said, "You've been listening to George Guidall. To continue, turn the casket over." Thank you very much. Thank you. Great audience.